This is the third in a series on staying one step ahead of your behind, colorectal cancer screening. This one gets a little bit geeky. The other two weren't, or the first two weren't. This gets into sensitivity and specificity, the trade-off. And we're talking about a test and then separating two different populations that unfortunately usually overlap in terms of the test. One of the best diagrams I've seen on that is here. Before we get too deep though, let's go back and talk about what some of the problems are with, what's the whole issue around colorectal cancer screening. But before that, a brief introduction. My name is Ford Brewer, F-O-R-D, Brewer, B-R-E-W-E-R. Started off as an ER doc professionally in the panhandle of Florida in an ER. Working in the ER, you get very focused on prevention. I went on to, and during that day, if you went into preventive medicine, it made a little bit of tended to make a bureaucrat and a manager out of you. And I said, you know what? I've been fighting this, but if it helps people more than just patching up disease, I'm going to do it. I did it. I went to Hopkins, got training, ended up running the program, and have been in prevention ever since. Have been involved mostly in training large groups of docs. I've been a corporate medical director for many, many years of my career, helping train primary care docs to understand the basics of prevention. Again, this is a series on staying one step ahead of your behind. Get checked out for colon cancer. Why is it a big deal? Well, colon cancer is the number 2 cause of cancer. It kills 51,000 people in the U.S. every year. 60% of those deaths could be avoided if we just got colorectal screening. Now, about half of 40% of people are not up on their colorectal screening. And again, I'm not gonna quibble over the details of the 60% and the 40%. Let's get a little bit deeper into the choices and why why they can be so complicated. Here's the thing: the definitive test is colonoscopy, full colonoscopy. But you have to go into an OR. You have to be put to sleep because it can be painful. The biggest issue is you have to take a day off of work and drink gallons of fluid to clean out your colon. Sigmoidoscopy is not quite as bad. You can do it in an office, but it only gets the latter half of the colon. There's a thing called a virtual CT colonoscopy. That's using a CAT scanner. All of these require cleaning your colon out. So then let's go back to the home methods. There is FOBT, which we had back in '81 when I was at Charity Hospital. It's fecal occult blood testing. It's looking for blood. You have to be careful about taking iron pills or even eating anything that has meat or hemoglobin in it before you take this test. There are some newer tests, FIT, immunochemistry testing. You don't have to worry so much about that. There's also another one called the DNA, fecal DNA testing. And believe it or not, there's yet another one, a blood DNA testing. We'll cover all of those a little bit deeper, a little bit later in another video. How did this come up? Well, in the USA Today in May 31st, they covered a story about the American Cancer Society saying, look, we've been recommending starting this colorectal screening at age 50. Now we're going to say 45. Why? Well, the major burden is 55 and older, but since '96, we've doubled our rate of cancers in people under age 50. Again, probably due to the obesity and diabetes epidemic. So, bottom line, you look at some of the educational components for colorectal screening and cancer. Don't wait for rectal bleeding, changes in bowel habits, blood in your stool, things like that, go ahead and get the screening. But again, now the question is, what kind? See, here's the problem with the home testing. It's got a problem with sensitivity. So that's why we're getting a little bit geeky and epidemiological today and looking at sensitivity. When you go to the epidemiology texts, you start seeing a 2x2 table. No disease here on the right, or no colorectal cancer, and have the disease or disorder on the left, colorectal cancer. Then you have the test. A positive test is up here and a negative test is down here. So out of the group, there are going to be people that have the disease and get a positive test. There are going to be people that have colorectal cancer that have the disease but still have a negative on the test. And this is actually the major problem with the home tests for colorectal cancer. Why? Because colorectal cancers don't constantly bleed. Sometimes they just grow with no bleeding. So epidemiologically speaking, then what is sensitivity? It's the ratio of true positives over false negatives plus true positives. In other words, the number of people that are tested appropriately, true positives, out of everybody that's got the disease. So let's look at that just in a couple of other ways real quick. In this diagram, over on this side you have the disorder. On this side you don't have it. The people within the circle are the people that test positive. And so these would be true positives. These would be false positives. These would be false negatives. Again, if you look at it in terms of colorectal cancer, these are the people that you're catching. These are the people that have the cancer, but it wasn't bleeding at the time you took the fecal occult blood sample. So they have the cancer. It came out as a negative. It was a false negative, and the person thinks they're okay, but they're not. Another way of looking at this, again, as I brought up in the original part of the video, is looking at populations. What you assume here is that you've got two populations with one with, let me see, this would be under the red with disease, under the blue without disease. And this line represents the test. The people that test positive include people that have true positives, but plus false positives. People that test negative, true negatives plus false negatives. And again, you can move this, in a lot of testing, it's not just a positive or a negative, it's a threshold. So you can move the threshold up and back. This makes it look fairly simple that you want to just go right here, but maybe not. Maybe it's not a problem to find a false negative because you can do more testing and rule out those false negatives fairly quickly. Or false positives, same thing. Maybe it's easier, maybe it's not a problem to have a false positive. In fact, that's what we do with most of our testing, like screening for breast cancer. And we lean towards having more false positives in any type of screening program like this to have a second tier of diagnosis. Like with breast cancer, it would be it'd be a biopsy. With colorectal cancer screening, it's the colonoscopy. Thank you for your attention.